Hello, and welcome to the First Time Founders podcast, the show where we talk about how to start a business from nothing and grow it into something meaningful. I'm Rob Lydiard. I was the co-founder CEO of a software business called Yapster that was acquired in 2022. I'm now a professional implementer of the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS, which means I work with entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial leadership teams to help them get more of what they want from their business. In practice, that means setting and actually hitting targets, executing with more discipline and accountability against the vision, and improving organizational health, because we can be a bit chaotic in startup land. That's my day job, but in my spare time, I love talking to entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial leadership teams and suppliers about the first time founder experience, the trials and tribulations, the highs and lows that we're going through and that we've learned along the way. If that's you, if you're interested in any of these themes, please don't be a stranger. Use the links in the show notes to reach out and say hi. Whether you want to be on the podcast or just have a chat, I'd love to hear from you. Today, I'm speaking to Eddie Whittingham. Eddie's a successful founder that recently exited his business and rolled his proceeds into acquiring a beautiful old church building outside of Manchester and restoring it to become a co-working facility that's got city-level facilities in a suburban environment. It's brilliant because he's showing other first-time founders what you can do with the proceeds of a first initial, Eddie would describe it as modest success, to go forward and continue to do interesting, creative things whilst providing for your family. He's a fantastically modest guy, but actually he's super wise. And I think you'll get an awful lot from this episode, particularly if you're interested in building a bootstrap business that can change your family's life from an exit that isn't necessarily a unicorn outcome. So without further ado, my conversation with Eddie Whittingham. Eddie, welcome to the First Time Founders podcast. Thank you for doing this, mate.
No, pleasure. Thanks for having me, mate.
So you're now a Northwestern property magnate, right? But before I tease you mercilessly about now being a passive investor, if co-working is passive, do you want to give the folks the potted history of your background to hear and how you got your hands on the ill-gotten gains to be able to afford to renovate that beautiful old building you're speaking from today?
Yeah, sure. Background being I was in the police for sort of just shy of 10 years, various roles, 999 response, did a little bit of covert stuff, and then fraud investigation. While I was there, decided I didn't want to do that forever, so I studied law, qualified then as a lawyer, moved to Manchester to do the job, but very quickly realised I hated it. I then started a business. First off was just selling time for money, service-based business. Didn't really know what I was doing, to be honest. My sort of first foray into being a business owner. And then sort of within sort of 6 months, I pivoted that into an online cybersecurity business, a SaaS business. So built that up over the sort of course of 3 years and just got super lucky, right time, right place kind of story, usual story, and got acquired by an American company. And then I had to do a bit of an earn out for them, a couple of years. And then I sort of started a few other ventures. So I've got like a founder focused business where we help typically founders with ADHD focus on the most important work. That's called Go Founder. Co-founded a baby sleepwear brand with a friend of mine. That's called Grow Grows. And then I bought an old a chapel built in 1891 with the sort of idea of turning it into a co-working space, which is where I'm sat today.
That's awesome. Where's the space?
In Swinton, Manchester.
Fantastic. So it's kind of like city facilities, suburban location, right?
Exactly that. Yeah, that was kind of the business plan, I guess. It was, I've worked in most of the co-working space in Manchester city centre, and my criticism has always been, why is there nothing like this on the suburbs for the people like myself who can't be asked travelling in and doing the commute? So yeah, I saw this building. Obviously, it's a beautiful sort of old chapel. And I was like, if we convert this and do it properly, I think we could do well out of it. So yeah, here we are.
Amazing. We're going to go back through all your war stories of operating service and technology businesses. But first, tell me, what is it like as a property owner? Is it as piss easy as it looks? Is it passive?
Well, I don't know. Ask me in a year, maybe. We're still very much in the setup. So we've only been open, I think it's our 5th week now. So still super early. I'm still doing a lot of the troubleshooting and the day-to-day sort of care of the building. Emptying the dishwasher and all that sort of glamorous stuff. So a few people have ribbed me, it's all a good selling business, but I'm basically now a janitor. But no, it's good. So far, so good. Like I say, we're about 30% occupancy, so quite happy we're ahead of track for where I thought we would be. Ask me in a year once we're full and I could afford someone else to to pay to empty the dishwasher.
Tell me about the space, because I'm fascinated by this. I listen to, I don't know if you do or not, but I listen to a lot of business related podcasts, not just in my target market of B2B SaaS and services. And I do find myself looking enviously at the property girls and boys quite often. Can you just talk to us a bit about the space, like what caught your eye about it, what the
Yeah.
process was of turning it from what it was into what it is, and then we'll go into, like the boring businesses that you and I have spent most of our careers in.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, sort of the intention behind the building anyway, firstly, was to obviously deploy some of the capital from the sale of my business as an investment, and looked at all the typical investment routes and realised I thought I could, if I did it right, could make a better return. So the beauty about obviously the sort of building that I've got, I guess, it's both an investment, a capital investment, but also an income.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of the basic logic behind it. My other sort of business side of it was always, if I found a cool enough building outside the city centre, I think that would be enough to draw people in, provided it's finished to a sort of premium standard. So I kind of was tentatively looking for buildings that I thought could do that. And then, of all places, I saw this come up for sale on Rightmove. So it's a chapel originally built in 1891. It's not massive. It's sort of in total now we've done the work, it's about 5,000 square feet, so not massive by any stretch. Sort of usual reception toilet, shared kitchen, sort of a snug extension of the kitchen. We've got a content studio, a couple of meeting rooms, 8 private offices downstairs, and then 36 co-working desks upstairs, and then a sort of like breakout lounge. So in terms of like co-working sizes, that's quite modest. But yeah, it's obviously, the purchase of the building was one thing, but then the actual work to convert was another, because when we got it, it was an original, church hall, really, with some facilities at the back. And what we've effectively done is put another floor in the church hall to give it the sort of space that it needed to make it viable, really. So been a bit of a mission getting it here with all the work that needed to be done, but yeah, it's turned out all right.
What for folks that are inspired to follow your lead, roughly how long does it take to take a building like that from what it was into what you've just described, and then like ballpark sort of costs? I know it's like how long's a piece of string, and it depends on what kind of crazy building the people listening to this go on to buy, but just like just within an order of magnitude.
Yeah, so bought the building in 2021, and then we only just opened in January. Part of that was planning related. The actual construction work was sort of probably more like 18 months-ish of sort of hard construction. So that wasn't maybe as long as people might think. But in terms of like building costs, it again completely depends on the building acquisition, or obviously people get loans or whatever. So that'll depend on one thing, but you're talking sort of £1 million renovation, really.
So it's a serious undertaking, isn't it? But it
Yeah.
is awesome. On this
Yeah.
podcast, like we talk a lot about the struggles of being a first-time founder and all the dumb shit we do and all the bad stuff that
Well, this
happens
might
to
be
us.
one of them yet. We'll see. It might be one of them yet.
Yeah, but at least it's a hard asset, and it's awesome for someone to realize some value in one thing and then roll it forward into something that's different but related.
Truthfully, part of it was also like, it's all in good selling your business, and I'm very, very lucky and privileged to be in that position. But it's like, well, what do I do now? I'm 38. I've got 2
I was
young
going to say,
kids.
you're not as old as you look, are you?
No, I'm not. Yeah, despite how bad I look. But it's more like, what do I do now? I don't want to. I've sort of like lost my colleagues and my team as such. So what do I want to do? And really, my interest area, my passion is around startups. So I was like, well, almost if I build something where I then surround myself with that, that's going to be amazing for me, right? Like it's my interest area. Hopefully I can help the people in here as well grow theirs, if I can offer any help or make connections with people who might be able to help, that sort of thing. So it kind of, it's just sort of sat quite nicely, I think, in my area of interest, sort of passion area, but also my skill area as well. Good.
I'm super inspired by it. I can't wait to come visit. Okay, so let's go back to the biggest cock ups, or like some of the most notable memories from before life got easy, because folks that are coming into your space are no doubt going to be going through those trials and tribulations. Can you remember the first time the novelty wore off one of the businesses that you were running, and and you now look back and think, I didn't handle that perhaps as well as I could have?
Ooh, yeah, good question. I think the novelty wears off really quickly, if I'm honest. When you first start, you have these ideas in your head of what it's going to be like. And then when you sort of get into the grind of it, you realize that if you're not careful, you've just created another job for yourself, but it's a job without any of the security that you had before. So
Yeah.
it's true though, isn't it? Like it's hard that, because I remember I'd quit. The reason I quit when I did in the legal profession was I'd just gone from being a trainee on like a sort of, an average sort of salary to like a half decent salary. So I knew if I didn't make the jump then, I never would. That was really
Yeah,
something I
yeah.
was quite aware of, because I was like, if I get comfortable on it, we're going to just get mortgaged up to what we can afford, etc., etc. So that was an element. But then obviously start a business. I had no business experience whatsoever. So I was kind of just winging it. Well, as we all are, that's, disclosure. I still am winging it. But it was, I think in those first sort of 3 to 6 months when you realise actually it's not as easy as you maybe first thought it was going to be.
Were you bootstrapping, or did you raise outside investment for
No,
the security service business?
bootstrap.
Did you have a decent amount of savings to cushion you, or did you go into it undercapitalized?
Probably undercapitalized looking back now. I didn't know that at the time, but I guess that was from the naivety of a business. I genuinely didn't even understand investment at that stage. I'd come, bear in mind, I'd spent most of my working life at that point in the public sector, really.
Yeah.
So I was pretty naive view of business generally at that point. And I guess my aspirations at the time of starting were very different. When I first started, it was, can I just do something that will replace my income versus, trying to grow something and scale it and exit. That
Right,
wasn't my
right.
plan. I didn't start out with that intention of selling a business. So it all happened quite organically, which for me actually was probably a good thing.
Totally.
So to your point, in terms of like one of the early cock-ups I made, as I was transitioning from the sort of service-based business to the SaaS business, when it was just an idea really, and I'd not really proved it, I went to meet with an investor to kind of, someone who was introduced to me because they obviously knew I was doing a cybersecurity business and it was SaaS, so obviously that's quite an attractive proposition for investors. Went to go meet him and I told him all about it, and he said, like, how much money do you want? I had no fucking idea. I was like, 200 grand. And he pretty much laughed in my face. Not in a horrible way, but like, I clearly didn't really know what I was asking for, why I was asking for it. I hadn't prepared properly for it because I didn't know what I was doing. And that was a nice wake up call in a way, because I was like, actually, if I do want to try and get investment, I'm going to have to take it a lot more seriously than I'm doing. But also, it was a blessing in disguise anyway, because it probably put me off trying to get investment, and I became more committed to bootstrapping, which actually is what really sort of set me off in good stead for what I'm doing now, because there's a time and a place for investment, and I'm neither. I used to be anti-investment, but only because of the bootstrap kind of success I had. Whereas now I'm way more open to it, because I can see that if you get investment at the right time, it can really propel you. But if I look back on my journey, I don't think investment would have. It might have got me a bit further forward, but my exit value would have had to been a lot bigger to get the same as what I got. So
100%.
yeah, so there's that balance sometimes to be had. I think there's definitely been a culture, and this is probably why I used to kick against it a little bit more. There's definitely been a culture of like overly celebrating investment rather than profitability, which I find absolutely bonkers.
Me too.
But yeah, there's still awareness that some businesses do need investment to scale. That's just a reality.
Can you remember what you want, what your kind of revenue or income goals were in the early days, and how you got there? Like roughly how long it took? Like, was it a handful of
Yeah,
big customers? Was it quite a lot of small customers? Can you just help people get a picture of what it looked like once you were
a lot.
semi-stable?
Yeah, so in the very early days, a lot slower than you probably would think. I think I did a LinkedIn post about this a few weeks ago, because I found some of my old sort of account stuff, and like first month I think I did 400 quid. Then sorry, first month I did zero. The second month I did 400 quid. The next month I did like 800 quid or something, but daft like that. So quite slow to start with. That's obviously the revenue, not what I made out of the back of
Yeah,
it.
yeah. And this is teaching companies and their employees
Sorry, yeah,
how
this
to stay safe, right? From
not
a
at the minute.
cybersecurity perspective.
Yeah, not at that time. It wasn't. No, that was when I was selling basically services to law firms, like private investigation stuff. So it was really like
Right.
low end stuff. When I got into the SaaS stuff, that started out very slowly. So that was the first customer I got from like a kind of networking thing was paying me 15 quid a month. They had 3 members of staff. But what that did give me is confidence that, do you know what, if I can sell that at £5 per employee per month in my head, and I'm going to sell that team the same training as I'm going to sell this company with 100 employees at maybe not £5 per month, but it'll come down a little bit. But that sort of sliding scale, then there's something really scalable about that. But ultimately my business model was, we deliver new training every single month for your staff to take. So we made it every single month, delivered it via a SaaS platform. We had some other bits alongside it, like a simulated phishing platform to sort of test users and things like that. But yeah, the fundamental basics was, if we build one piece of training, we can roll that out to 1,000 companies. It doesn't matter. That's the idea. That's what made it probably quite attractive. And even though those early customers paid me pennies, it was still worth it because it gave me that confidence to build on. So then I kind of just slowly climbed the sort of ladder, really. So that first client had 5 employees, the next client maybe had 10, then they had 50, and then sort of our biggest deals as when we was fully up and running, like 5,000 employees, for example. So we were Taylor Wimpey were one of our big clients. So yeah, stuff like it really varied in terms of income based on the deal size. Our average deal size might only be like $2,000 a year, but then some of those big deal sizes could be 25 grand a year.
Right. And it adds up quickly then, doesn't it?
Yeah. And interestingly as well, we had a lot of the smaller ones, which was good in a way, because as a SaaS business, you churn. Obviously, the goal is to keep that as minimal as possible. We had next to no churn. And even if we did, I could sleep a little bit better at night knowing, I wake up on the first of every month, we've got X many customers paying X, Y a month. And even if, the wheels fall off, we're not going to lose 50% of them. We might lose 1 or 2 a month. So it's a really good business model for that reason alone. But again, there's no like I want a fucking genius and went, I'm going to do that business model. I came to that fairly naturally, and just kind of as part of the path of building a business, and pivoted and saw the opportunity. And I think that's sometimes the best way to do it.
I love how modest you are about it. How did you win the customers? Like, what in practice, like, was it sort of dumbed down go to market? Was it like LinkedIn, emailing, using the phone? Like, talk people through granularly.
Yeah, we did it. We did a bit of everything, because I was like, I've got no fucking idea where to even start. So first customers was doing kind of cold, nasty networking,
Yeah.
which I didn't particularly enjoy, and it was never going to scale the business, but it helped me basically validate it.
Yeah.
So as an example, we were trying to sell cybersecurity training to businesses. So quite logically, I was like, right, well, if I go to a couple of events that are being held by, for example, one of them was by a bank to educate businesses about cybersecurity, I can kind of sit there and mingle with everybody who's clearly got an interest enough to come to an event for free in the centre of town, and taking the time out of the day to do it, and then obviously try and sell my wares there. And that's where I got my first couple of clients from, really doing a couple of those. And then after that, it was a real mix of cold. We did loads of cold emailing. We did loads of LinkedIn outreach. And we did loads of paid ads eventually once we had the revenue to do it. But again, it was interesting for us because we were trying to educate people around data security, personal information. GDPR obviously became a big sort of a big impact on the business that I probably hadn't originally accounted for, and that was part of the look. So we were effectively spamming people about securing themselves against spam. So we got a few sort of snarls, obviously, about it, because it doesn't quite tie in with GDPR because you're sort of hammering us with emails and stuff. But by the same token,
You got to get out there, haven't you?
well, yeah, and that's where sometimes you've got to do what works, right? And I think one of the books I read, which is pretty old now, was called The Predictable Revenue Model.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a classic, isn't it? And it just teaches about CRMs and cold outreach, and almost a bit of training for your brain that to get some success, you've you just got to have a huge hopper at the top, put thousands in, and you might get one or two out the bottom, and that's fine, provided obviously it's profitable to do so. But then the real kind of kicker for us, where we started gaining more traction, was GDPR, really. So obviously people gave a shit about that a few years ago, less so now.
Yeah,
But it was
yeah.
a real scare thing for people that weren't sure about it, that were really worried about it, and we were making better training than our competitors on that topic, because the training was pretty. I mean, it's a pretty fucking dry topic anyway, right?
Yeah.
But the training was even worse than how that. So we just made something mildly interesting compared to what was out in the market, and put some ad spend behind what we were doing, and that helped sort of grow the business quickly.
What a great story, though. It's so inspiring, and particularly now that you've got a space where you're trying to attract and inspire a new wave of entrepreneurs. When you're like, start a simple business for which there's a demand, like
Yeah,
an intrinsic demand, and then hopefully a growing demand if you get the luck of some sort of tailwinds, like a new piece of regulation. Build something small but repeatable that you don't need to build again and again and again. Just validate it by selling it. I mean, in your case, 15 quid a month. I mean, it's amazing that you're sat there in a church that you bought with the proceeds when it
yeah,
started with a 15 quid a month income. And then just put yourself out there and tell the story and sharpen up the story, and eventually you'll hopefully get to a place where it's viable and ongoing. So all of that sounds good, and everyone knows you had a happy ending. What would you say were your biggest points of maturation as a business owner stroke manager? Because of course I'm similar to you. I had a legal background, qualified, then realized it wasn't for me, and left. So I hope you won't mind me saying, being a young lawyer doesn't particularly prepare you for
no,
elite leadership, does it? And like winning hearts and minds of the average the average employee. So any particular learnings that you can pay forward for others in terms of, because I'm assuming you got a bit better at managing by the end of the journey than maybe you started. Are there any particular standout moments with your workforce that folks
yeah.
might be able to learn from?
I think I always tried to be fair. Like, that was my ultimate thing: transparency and fairness. So I'm a pretty relaxed guy anyway, and my sort of attitude towards all life, not just business, is like, I will give you 100% of my trust until you give me reason not to trust you, basically. So I will trust people implicitly. I will give them responsibility, and I will try and also help them succeed, really. Like, that's probably what I get the most joy out of. So if I know, if you came into my business today and you had career goals of whatever they might be, then I'd sort of work backwards from that and say, right, well, let's try and start putting a path towards that. I've always kind of taken a view, I'd rather really high on attitude rather than degrees and things like that. One of my best members of staff had done a degree in art. I needed an illustrator. He was working in a sort of pretty crap job at the time, in his own words, and we just got him in as an intern, paid intern, just to get started and just kind of see if there was really a role for him, because I wasn't quite sure. We'd never hired an animator at that point, whether we really needed it. And then his work was so good, I was like, oh shit, we need to hire him. So hired him on a pretty modest wage, because that's all we could afford at the time. But then within 2 years, his wage had doubled, because
Brilliant.
I did. I'm not trying to blow smoke up my ass. It's not that we needed to, but I wanted to reward him because he was really good, and I don't think a lot of businesses necessarily do that, and then it doesn't always breed loyalty. Like, I could have just kind of tickled him along with a couple of grand pay rise every year,
But you wanted to do the right thing, right, and keep him.
100%, and the value he was bringing to the business was worth it. So let's keep those staff engaged.
But
Not that,
I'm just going to jump in quickly because I love this. I had a similar experience. I'm assuming that little bit of success with an early star who you treated well and he reciprocated, then created the environment for some less good people to
quite.
do the dirty on you, right?
Yeah, and that's the problem. So if that's the way you are, then there's always going to be those opportunities where that happens. And I'll tell there's a story where someone, in my view, they took advantage. When people listen to this podcast, they might be going, "Oh, actually, you sound a bit of a wanker, Eddie." But let's just see, right? So
I don't think so. I can totally. The backdrop is good, right? Best intentions, give people opportunities. Loads of founders are optimists. They're going to be making the exact same starting assumptions.
I think so. So this was a chap. We were trying to hire a sales role, notoriously difficult roles to fill, and this particular lad in mind, he was studying part-time cybersecurity on a Tuesday and a Friday morning. So I was like, mint, he's got a sales background, he presents well, and ultimately, he's studying in an area that's going to be massively useful to us and help with the sales lingo, right?
Yeah. And you've got the pattern recognition from your illustrator who you plucked out of a position.
Yeah,
got it.
So I was like, right, I think this is, this guy could do us a really good job here. So I said, well, look, I'll tell you what, rather than, in recognition of the fact you are studying in something obviously hyper relevant and could help the business, I'll pay you full time, even though you're not going to be here like a day and a half a week. I'm going to pay you full time because I think that's the value you can bring. And also that's me investing in you and saying, look, I really believe in you and I think what you can bring to the business. And then, so all well so far. Then first day, he arrives late. Second day, which is fine. Like we all sometimes are late. Second day, guy. Yeah. Second day, he took like a couple of hours for lunch. I wasn't there. He then left early without even. I was at a meeting, without even an attempt to ring me or email me. Just left. So obviously my other staff are like, "What the fuck?" Like Eddie's pretty relaxed, but he's not that relaxed. And then the third day, so this was on the Wednesday, he rang in sick.
Yeah.
Because he'd microwaved a beef lasagna and that had made him sick. Which I'm not even sure you can get poorly from. But again, I was like, look, he might just be having a week from hell, right?
Right.
Like,
it's probably me, right?
Yeah. Like, and then he didn't come in the next day, and then the day after, the day after. So he's ill on the Wednesday. On the Thursday, he sent me a sick note, which I've A, not even asked for. B, I've never even seen a sick note. So like, I was really blown away. I was like, why have I got a sick note? Because you've only been off a day. And then on the Friday, he sent me his wife's sick note, which, yeah. So yeah, unfortunately, that sort of spelt the end. So I spoke to HR and all the usual sort of stuff that you have to do. But then he sent me a very abusive email afterwards when I'd let him go about how horrible I was and how
you do sound like a tyrant, to be fair.
Yeah, and I sort of said, I was like, dude, like I've offered to pay you full time for 3.5 days a week, and I don't know what else you want from that. So.
Did it change your hiring process? I mean, did you reference check the guy before? Because I did reference checks at the beginning of my entrepreneurial.
So the irony is, that's the only hire I've ever done where I've done it by the book. So I've done
really,
yeah. So my other hires have always just been come in, have an informal chat. Maybe we'll do a bit of a paid internship, whatever it might be, but it'll be quite informal. This one, I must have read a fucking book that week about how to hire, and I did assessment interview, assessment day. We did all the the checks. We did the whole scoring system. Yeah, and it was quite.
No!
And almost like maybe there's.
Did it put you off doing it again? I love that. I love that system. That's the only thing I found that worked eventually. It's amazing that you had diametrically the opposite experience.
And look, I've only, my team at the max was only 10 people, so it's not a fair litmus test.
Right.
I'm sure anyone listening to this with a HR background will
like hands over their ears, over their eyes. They're like, Eddie, no, don't tell people this.
I guess for me, if I go back to it, I think I work better with people based on their attitude than probably their aptitude, because I think you can kind of teach some of it, but you can't teach attitude. So I guess it probably has put me off that model of hiring, really.
So digging into it, what do you think went wrong then? Did you ask the wrong questions? You score incorrectly? Were the references bullshit? Do you think this guy genuinely just just went off the reservation?
I don't know.
In between prior employment and working for you?
I'm not sure. he certainly said all the right things,
As
but then
salespeople often do, right?
yeah. But then he should be a good salesman, right? That was a frustrating thing. I was like, if you're actually in the building or working from home and actually doing the work, then yeah, I don't know really. Maybe
Can't tell.
probably a victim as well of if you with some people, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, won't they? So
Yeah, that's
um,
true.
so I think probably it made me think I probably need to be a little bit not stricter because that's not my style, but maybe not think everyone's in it for the best reasons always. Like
Well,
some people.
did it make you clearer? Like, did you find yourself getting clearer and clearer and clearer of people as you went on your journey?
I don't know, to be honest. Like, I don't know if I've had a massive like transformational kind of leadership journey or anything. You'd have to probably interview some of my old staff, but I think I've got better at it, and I certainly like 100% when I first took my first hire on. I think I expected them to be like a co-founder and like almost as bought in as I am, even
Yeah,
though they were getting paid like pretty rubbish money at the time. So I probably would say unfair expectations of early employees because of my naivety, and I think that changed as I got obviously a bit more mature in terms of owning a business because you have to, and you have to also let go a little bit. But by the same token, I don't always see those standards as a bad thing because while I'm very relaxed, I expect you to be to want to really work hard. And I make no bones about like work shouldn't be a negative term. Like working hard shouldn't be a negative. I hate all the sort of hustle bullshit, but
yeah,
I
me
also
too.
hate the fact that that's now killed like like work is a bad thing. It's like as long as you enjoy it, obviously, and not everyone does. But your job as a business owner is to try and make the work enjoyable for your staff ultimately.
It's so interesting. I think one of the things I find really refreshing about your story is that given that you enjoyed some success, you got to a place where the business was acquired, and you self-admittedly are like, I didn't have to optimize this business or develop myself to within like an inch of my professional life in order to end up having a successful outcome. Because so many people start businesses where they raise too much money too quickly, they don't find
Oh,
product fit, they
all the time.
massively increase their expenses too quickly, and then they kind of have to get elite at an unnatural speed, otherwise the company will definitely die. Is it a fair characterization of your journey to say because you made some smart decisions early, deliberately or not, it meant that the organization wasn't under so much pressure that you kind of had to be
Probably because we
a
grew
way that
quite.
others sometimes
Yeah, I
do?
mean, we grew quite organically, so it was never like I think that's the problem. If I started that business again today and you give me £1,000,000, I'd suddenly have to hire 10 people
Right.
like overnight, and then you struggle to build the dynamics. Like here's a really good example actually. So the sort of number one hire that I made, the first hire, fantastic, really good worker, amazing, all rounder, like super intelligent, super nice, had everything, and then it got to my first daughter was on the way and she handed a notice in, and that like really took the legs from under me because she was effectively the right hand man, and I was like,
Oh wow! How close to your daughter being born?
oh well, yeah, that was the bit. So she was an amazing member of staff, but that was the bit that kicked really because she handed a notice in a week before.
Just
Uh,
totally out the blue.
yeah, and like so again, one thing I tried to do which didn't work, but was I tried to sit down with the staff. Well, I did sit down with the staff every single month. Took them to like a local coffee shop, sat down, sort of talked about career progression, where they want to be, if they've got any problems they want to raise. And the idea with that was a mutual thing really, because then I could hopefully help progress them, but then they could also tell me, where the problems are. If, give me at least a heads up, right? If they
Totally.
want to
I
move
did the
on.
same thing, yeah. And it was
And
effective for me. I didn't get blindsided like that. I feel really
well, no,
sorry for you about
yeah,
that.
and I didn't by anyone else. Unfortunately, just on that occasion, I did, which was a bit of a punch to the gut. However,
What did you do? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no,
Go
no,
on.
go
However.
on.
I'm curious to know how you dealt with that, because
Well,
presumably your daughter came along and you're now happy to do
yeah. So
both.
the good thing I think that I had been doing already anyway was not that I necessarily clocked that individual was going to be moving on, but I kind of was identifying as we were growing that, crikey, I've got people in roles here which if they do leave, I am knacked because I don't have that knowledge to pass on, or I certainly don't have the time to pass that knowledge on, because I probably knew I could probably do at that stage still everyone's job apart from the animator. But even if I could do it, I still couldn't pass on that knowledge because I wouldn't have the time to because of the other stuff that I was doing.
Totally.
So, so fortunately, I'd just hired almost a junior. I think it was only 6 weeks before.
Oh, wow.
So, but again, I just said to the girl who came in, I said, look, if you can basically use the next 4 weeks notice period that she has to learn absolutely everything and be a sponge, take it all in, you're getting paid, I don't know what she was on, maybe 21, but I'll put you up to what she was on, I think. I can't remember the exact deal, but it was like a real mega incentive where she was like, shit, I've only been in the job 4 weeks and I can get like a fucking $8,000 pay rise if I just.
What an incredible opportunity for her, yeah. In the EOS world, we call it documenting your core processes to protect you from that.
Yeah, and we sort of had started to do bits of that, but yeah, she was again like she was phenomenal because she really
the new one that came in.
Yeah. And then so was the old one because she did help really, train her. I think for the one who was outgoing, it was kind of like a job she felt she couldn't have delayed on.
Yeah, makes sense.
It's just that happens, right?
God, so you're quite lucky that you had a successor.
Yeah.
In
if
hand,
I
right? That was as.
If I hadn't,
but it wasn't entirely luck. Again, you're being modest, aren't you? Because you clearly had recognised you
yeah,
had some key person risk and hired. But Christ, imagine you didn't.
No, quite. And I would have been in a bit of a problem there, I think. I'd have certainly had some issues with clients and things like that. So, it's a good lesson in general. And it was advice I was given years ago. And it's one of them classic bits of advice that everyone says that you listen to, but you probably don't pay much attention to, but then maybe secretly
like Manana, right? Manana, we'll document and systematize everything tomorrow.
Yeah, but it was just, the bit of advice that still rings true is hire before you're ready to, really. As long as there's cash flow in the business, there's no point waiting until you need the hire because you've got to fucking train them. And it takes, 3 to 6 months for them to get up to speed, probably 12 months in a lot of roles. So I was always trying to hire a little bit ahead of time for that reason. And that definitely sort of saved my bacon on that one.
And one of the things I think is interesting, anybody that listens to this could labour under the misunderstanding that you've just had a completely charmed existence. It's one of the things that's so nice about you. But I remember when we were chatting before this, you just casually dropped that. Like, didn't you at one point pass out at night from the stress though?
Yeah. Well, like God, founder life, right, is not glamorous, is it? It's pretty. It's hard. There's long days. I worked weekends as long as I can remember. I didn't take money for as long as I can remember. We was living off my wife's wage. She was a teacher at the time. And this sounds a bit like, oh, woe is me. But we were genuinely going out where we lived near a Wetherspoons and we had like £8 and we're like, well, that can buy a couple of pints each and that's our night out for the week. And like vividly remember that. And even trying to like celebrate sort of small milestones in the business. Like we, the first American client, we had like a little list. In fact, this is a good bit of advice, people. We had a little list on the fridge of, things we wanted to achieve, and then little rewards at the side. So and I can't remember who made me do it, but
that's awesome.
It was such a good piece of advice because you'll be the same, and people listening to this will be the same. You don't celebrate stuff ever. You achieve it, and then it's next thing. Achieve it, next thing. So this was quite useful because it just made you stop, even though it was kind of a bit daft. Like, for example, the US client, first ever US client, next to that was there was like a US themed fucking restaurant in town or some shit. So we went there.
You didn't take the missus to New York?
No, God, no. Because we didn't have the money, truthfully. Yeah. Like the first US client, it was probably £800 a month or something. It wasn't mega. So it was like, a £50 meal, but it was just a way of marking those little things. Or
that's
it was like,
awesome.
Hit X revenue, then we might have a weekend away, that sort of thing. So that was quite a good thing to do.
But again, you're being positive. I love your optimism, your positivity. We'll move on from it quickly, but what caused it to get too much for you, and then what physically happened? Because I think that is something people can also take out of this, even when you get a good outcome.
Interestingly, it was around the time the person had the notice in. Wife was 8 or 9 months pregnant at the time. I was obviously well under the cosh in terms of work, trying to work all the hours, make sure the wife was okay, prepping for the baby arriving, sorting the nursery out, all the usual sort of stuff that you have to do, especially when it's your first child,
Oh, it's
right?
brutal.
It's like it's complete unknown, isn't it?
Mm.
So I think it was about 4 weeks before my daughter was born, and I think I'd gone to bed just not feeling very well. Got up in the middle of the night to have a piss, and then I think I'd sort of stumbled like near the bath and the toilet, and then the next thing I remember was sort of coming round, and my wife said she ran in because she heard me sort of fall, and I was laid. We've got sort of a toilet and a bath next to it, like a freestanding bath, and I was laid in between the toilet and the bath. My head was sort of like twisted around, looking sort of into the corner so she couldn't see me,
No.
and I was completely out.
That must have scared the shit
Oh,
out of her.
well, it got worse. So they call it like a vasovagal, which is where basically it's an issue with your blood pressure. So when you're poorly, your blood pressure's low. If you have if you get out of bed too quickly, it'll drop again, and then if you have a wee again, it'll drop again, and so then you just go straight out. So that's what happened. Obviously, she didn't know this at the time, so she's trying to wake me up. She's really scared. I think she'd rang 999 at that point because she was like, "Fucking hell." Genuinely, in her words, she thought I was dead because of the way I was like laid. So that's not an ideal situation. But then, while she's on the phone on 999, I jump upright. I can't remember this, by the way. Jump upright. My pupils are dilated, and I started in her face screaming, "Wolves! Wolves!" So I have a vague recollection of in my subconscious thinking I was being attacked by wolves. But as I got up, I thought, because I didn't know, I was just like disorientated. My wife was then screaming in my face, so I wasn't sure if like we'd been broken into and I'd been hit around the head or something. So it was like genuinely, like for her, it must have been terrifying, right?
That is bonkers.
And then the police obviously had heard, or the 999 call had heard me shouting "wolves." So before an ambulance got there, the police got there to be like, "What the fuck is going on here?" Thinking it was like domestic violence, obviously, and then it wasn't. It was just me sat being sick into a bowl. But yeah, it wasn't the finest, and like it's hard. You can't pin exactly
Right.
what's caused that, but if you look at like the stress period that we were under at that time, because also at that stage I had been approached for the acquisition, but that was long and protracted. That they reached out originally in the August, and my daughter was born in the May. Yeah, so that time. So
That was a real long courtship.
yeah. So I had the potential acquisition kind of playing in my mind. I had a member of staff who just said they leave. My wife's nearly gonna pop, etc., etc., etc. So it doesn't take a genius to figure out that's probably what caused it.
People don't know what their limits are until you cross it. I remember
No.
it's not quite the same, but I know I ended up on a bloody ventilator with COVID,
Right,
and I'd been doing like demos and stuff right up until they put me on the oxygen, and my body had never failed on me before.
Yeah.
And it was really frightening. I was in the hospital for like 5 days.
Bloody
I
hell.
couldn't. I'd go for a wee, and it would feel like you were suffocating in the 2 minutes it took to get from your bed and off the oxygen to the toilet and back again. And I remember thinking, like, my God, if I'd have had a heart attack or a stroke or something because of the stress I was under, that might be irrecoverable, right? Might live, if you survive it, you might live the rest of your life carrying the physical impairment that you brought on by working like a lunatic.
Yeah, and
it's
that's
really frightening.
It is, isn't it? And that is the reality of like, not the reality, but that is a thing people need to be aware of when they're sort of growing a business. It's very easy, and I was guilty of this, and I probably still am to some extent. But I see it all the time. It's very easy to get caught up in the romance and the excitement of building a startup without necessarily realizing how hard you're working. And that sounds weird if you're not a founder, but when you're in it because you enjoy it, you end up doing stupid long hours, or you're working weekends. You're not having breaks. You're not going on holiday. Sometimes you're not socializing. It can have a real negative impact.
With the hormones, right?
Realizing, pardon.
The hormones, right? Your body's like your body's in like a fight response or a flight response for half a decade.
Yeah, and that's why I'm bald. I had a lovely, thick, luscious head of hair at one point. But
You look
yeah,
like it's all right. You look like the Jason Statham of co-working.
yeah, that's what I'm going with. Yeah,
You're
yeah,
styling it out. No, definitely. I was in much better shape before the founder journey. But I think it's really important to speak to, particularly if you can laugh about it, and
yeah.
how
Look, yeah,
dopey
you've
you
got,
were.
yeah,
He has a happy ending at the end. But I agree. I see it in founders all the time as well, and that like recognizing that they have to embrace some structure
and
and then look after themselves.
and also there's a risk that you just chase it indefinitely, and I think that
Yeah.
as founders you need to be alive to that you know just because you work hard, just because you've got talent, don't mean you're going to get that luck. I think you need those two to be able to benefit from the luck, but it's quite within the realms of possibility that my acquisition didn't ever go through, and I'd still be working as hard, and my business would have been as good as the one they bought. They just decided
Mm.
not to buy it for whatever market reasons, like COVID, for example. They might not have bought that, so it was on a flip really whether they bought it or not. And yeah, it wouldn't have meant my business was any worse or better. It just was a decision that was made, and that's the luck element, really.
Yeah, that's why it's got it. Yeah, if you can make it so that it's sustainable, whatever the outcome, and worthwhile for you
Yeah,
and your family, makes a big difference. Eddie, this has been so good. For folks that are across the country, are you happy for people to reach out to you on LinkedIn or whatever?
yeah,
And I guess people in the Northwest, can they come in and have a look around Ministry of Work, grab a
yeah.
coffee or something?
Absolutely, yeah. So, if you want to get in touch, just LinkedIn, Eddie Whittingham. But yeah, if you're sort of local-ish to Manchester and you'd like to explore a new sort of co-working space or a private office or even the content studio that I'm sat in now, then yeah, just reach out again. Happy to set up a bit of a tour and have a coffee and a bit of a chat. Yeah, it'd be good to.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put the links in the show notes. Eddie, thank you so much. This has been amazing.
No, pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Cheers, mate.